In chapters 7, 8, and 9, we're going to take a look at the 5 basic social institutions in sociology. We focus on 5 social institutions such as the family, education, religion, government, and the economy, because we have found that each society known to man has each one of these social institutions, and they are primary institutions in the functioning of society. So we're going to take a look at those institutions. In this case, we're looking at the family, and in this, what we're going to examine right now is the composition of the family, because the family doesn't quite look the same or act the same always. When we talk about the family, no offense to you, but we're not necessarily talking about your family or my family, but we're talking about the family in general. And the family from one society to another may look very different. So when we think about the family and the function of the family, the primary function of the family is to control reproduction. So that is the major focus, or the major function, let's put it that way. Now, when we talk about a family, the family can be defined basically as a set of people related by blood or marriage or adoption, and who share the primary responsibility for reproduction and caring for members within society. So that's what we really mean by the family. Now, you will hear terms like the nuclear family and the extended family. Nuclear family refers to a married couple and their unmarried children living together. Extended family basically talks about the married couple along and their children living at home, but along with relatives in addition to them that live in the same household. So you may have a grandparent, or you may have an aunt or an uncle or someone of that nature that are living within the same household. And that's what we refer to as the extended family. Now, let's take a look here. In terms of the family composition, there are some basic terms and things, concepts that we need to look at real quick. First of all, monogamy. Monogamy simply refers to one spouse essentially being married to one spouse at a time. That's it. So that's monogamy. So it could be a man and woman, that are married to one another. It could be 2 men. It could be 2 women, depending on the culture. But monogamy is one spouse and only one at a time. Now, serial monogamy, there's been a big increase in serial monogamy over the last, really 20 or 30 years now. Serial monogamy refers to a person who may have several spouses in his or her life, but only one at a time. So, instead of being married for one, to one person for 60 years, they may be married to one person and then 5 years later get a divorce, remarry a couple years later. Maybe that person dies and then they remarry again. So they may be married to 3 or 4 people within their lifetime. But even though they're married to that many, we're only talking about one person at a time. Now, to compare that with polygamy, polygamy refers to the marriage of one person to several people, several other people at a time, at the same time. So polygamy simply refers to many spouses or several spouses at the same time. Now, if we take a look, there's 2 types of polygamy. First one we're going to talk about is polygyny, G-Y-N-Y. Polygyny refers to the marriage of one man to more than one woman at the same time. So a husband who has many wives. That historically has been an advantage in terms of reproduction, because one man could impregnate many women. So reproduction-wise, that has kind of flourished over the years. Polyandry, on the other hand, refers to one woman who has many husbands at the same time. Now, we don't hear about that very frequently because, in terms of serving a purpose or serving a function, as far as reproduction, that doesn't work. Okay, so we really don't see that nearly as often throughout history. Now, we can also talk about communal living. In some cultures and even in some subcultures within the United States, for that matter, we have had instances of communal living, or you might think of it as a communal marriage. If we look back to, let's say, the 1960s time period in the United States, you hear about like the hippie movement and things like that. You heard about, for example, the Manson family, Charles Manson. The Manson family consisted of many men, many women, all living together. To put it very bluntly, the men would sleep with different women each night, and so they had a lot of children. When the children were born into that family, the children were viewed to belong to everybody. You knew who the mother was, obviously, but most of the time nobody knew for sure who the father was. And the child kind of took on, or was the responsibility, let's put it that way, of everyone. So that's communal living. Now, George Murdoch, this is the same George Murdoch we talked about earlier in terms of cultural universals. And back in the 1940s, George Murdoch researched over 565 different societies. And what's kind of interesting and almost unbelievable to us a lot of times, but in over 80% of those societies, 80% out of the 565 societies he researched, he found had some form of polygamy. So polygamy exists in the world and probably exists far more than what we in the United States really tend to think of. Now, let's talk about marriage and the family. In the United States, 95% of people in the United States will make the same mistake, okay, in terms of, I'm sorry, just joking, sort of, but will get married at some point in time in their lifetime, okay, over 95% of people in the U.S. Most people nowadays tend to be well into their 20s before they marry. That people are waiting longer nowadays. Years ago, they would marry much quicker. Endogamy tends to be the norm. Okay, now endogamy specifies that people are expected to marry within their own racial, ethnic, or religious group, or we could even think of as socioeconomic group. They tend to marry within their own social group. So this is intended to reinforce group cohesiveness. Now, if you look at this married couple up here, the happy couple, you can tell they tended to marry within their own group. They even look alike, for that matter. Now, that's endogamy, and again, that tends to be the norm. And for many years, for hundreds of years in the United States, that was the only culturally accepted form of marriage. Now, exogamy has taken a big leap here in the last 30 years. Exogamy requires that your mate selection be outside of certain groups, and it's kind of centered on that incest taboo. Virtually every society has an incest taboo that prohibits sexual relationships between certain relatives. And up until about the 1960s, interracial marriage was outlawed in many states in the United States. But nowadays, interracial marriages have been on the rise for at least the last 20 to 30 years now. So most people have found it to be very acceptable nowadays. And last thing we'll look at here, dual income families. The look and feel of the family nowadays is different than it used to be. If we look down here at the bottom of the screen, many years ago, we tended to think of the ideal American family being mom, dad, two kids, a dog or two, and mom stayed at home rather and took care of the household. Dad went out to work and so forth. That makes up less than 5% of families today. So that's not what we tend to see nowadays. There's a variety of types of the family, and we'll get into that later here. Dual income families. One of the things that a lot of families have found is that they simply cannot seem to afford to live the lifestyle they want to live on simply one income. So, either due to economic need or simply the fact that nowadays, couples are having fewer children. Some couples are having no children. And women are college educated nowadays. So women, they want to get into the workforce. They want to have a career of their own. There's a number of factors that have led to many families becoming dual income families. And we found that in these families, they tend to bring in about 91% higher, their incomes tend to be about 91% higher than single income families. But it's kind of interesting because research shows that they do tend to have more expenses and actually less savings than a single income family. So it's not always just a perfect scenario.